Every few months, I drive out to my remote cabin tucked deep in the snowy woods of northern Idaho. It's completely isolated, which is exactly what I wanted, and the main reason I bought it in the first place. It's perfect for short escapes, just to get away from everyone and spend a few days alone in the forest. This trip, it was the middle of winter. I had a 6-day stretch off work, and almost on a whim, decided to make the 4-hour drive north to the cabin. Since I hadn't prepared much, the trip was exhausting. I hadn't caught up on sleep beforehand, and by the time I arrived, I was already drained. I got there just as the sun was disappearing behind the trees. The narrow, snow-covered dirt road winding through the forest was tricky to follow once darkness fell. When I finally reached the clearing, I parked, grabbed my bag, and tossed it inside before heading around back to start the generator. The whole cabin ran off that one gas-powered unit. Lights, outlets, even the small electric stovetop. I didn't use much electricity anyway, so it was always enough. I filled the tank, pulled the cord until it caught, and went back inside to start the wood stove and warm the cabin. Winters in northern Idaho are brutal. Nighttime temperatures easily dip into the single digits or below zero. I never come here once the heavy snowstorms hit. That evening, I stayed up for only 2 hours before turning in. The next day, I spent time cleaning, dusting, patching small gaps in the walls, and sealing cracks where cold air could sneak in. Around midday, I noticed movement on the snow-covered trail. An old pickup truck was slowly making its way through the trees toward the cabin. I watched it approach, but before it reached the clearing, it stopped. It sat there for maybe 3 minutes. Then it turned around and drove back the way it came. I didn't think much of it at the time. Probably someone had taken a wrong turn, and maybe they had their own cabin deeper in the woods. That night, around 11 o'clock, I decided to enjoy the winter air and build a small fire on the front porch. It would give the wood stove more time to warm the cabin before bed. I grabbed a few old fire starters I'd left from previous visits and carried them outside. I had a small metal fire pit on the porch, so I stacked a few logs and lit them. Those first nights at the cabin are always special. Sitting there, surrounded by snow-covered trees, listening to the quiet whisper of the forest. I had only been outside for 15 minutes when suddenly the porch light went out. I turned back toward the cabin. All the interior lights were off too. The only glow came from the faint orange flicker of the wood stove. That's when I noticed something else. The generator wasn't running. It had shut off. Annoyed, I stood up and went around back. Sure enough, it was dead silent. I tried pulling the cord over and over, but after a dozen attempts, I gave up and kicked it in frustration. I told myself it was just an old machine finally giving out, doing what old machines do. But when I checked the fuel tank, my stomach sank. It was empty, completely dry. I had filled it with a full canister the night before. There was no way it could have used it all so quickly. I searched the snow around for any sign of a leak or spill. Nothing. No puddle, no wet ground. Nothing. I couldn't understand how this was possible. With no spare fuel, I realized I'd be without power until morning, when I could drive into the nearest town to get more. It was inconvenient, but not dangerous. The stove still gave off heat, and I was planning to sleep soon anyway. I didn't really need lights. I went back to the porch and sat down, trying to calm myself and enjoy the rest of the evening. Then I saw it. Off to the left of the snow-covered trail, among the trees and shadows, there was a shape. A person, or at least something shaped like one. I leaned forward, squinting into the darkness. It was so still, so dark, that I couldn't tell if it was a figure, or just an oddly shaped bush or pile of branches. After a few minutes, I finally stopped staring at the spot. Since it hadn't moved at all, I convinced myself it was nothing and went back to resting, listening to the quiet winter night. But about 2 minutes later, I glanced toward the trees again, and it was gone. I searched the forest line for several minutes, telling myself I'd just lost track of where it had been standing. But no matter where I looked, I couldn't find it anywhere. I won't lie, that rattled me. I'm not a paranoid person, but that was one of the most unsettling moments I'd had in a long time. If it had been a bush or a tree, it should have still been there. The thought of it disappearing made my skin crawl. For the next hour, I didn't take my eyes off the forest. The silence that usually felt peaceful now felt wrong. Heavy, like the woods were holding its breath. I had a growing sense that I wasn't alone, that I was being watched. Between that feeling and the generator cutting out earlier, something was clearly off. Then, a little after midnight, I heard a sudden sound to my right. A sharp crack, like a stick snapping against the frozen ground. Maybe it fell from a tree. Maybe something else caused it. I stared into the darkness in that direction, waiting to see if anything moved. Nothing did. After about 20 seconds, I slowly turned my head back toward the front of the cabin. My heart nearly stopped. The figure was back, standing in the exact same place as before. And then I saw another, and another. There were at least 8 shapes standing between the trees, maybe 60 yards away. They were perfectly still, perfectly silent, almost completely swallowed by the darkness. But they were all facing the cabin. My body went straight into panic. I jumped up and rushed inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I stood there in the dark, back pressed to the door, trying to slow my breathing and decide what to do. For a few minutes, I debated whether I even dared to look out the window. When I finally worked up the courage, I slowly peeked through the glass. Every single one of them was gone. The forest was empty. Strangely, that terrified me even more. I barely had time to process it before I heard something else. Footsteps, coming from behind the cabin. I could clearly make out at least 3 or 4 sets of boots crunching over the snow, though there might have been more. I immediately closed the blinds on the front window. I stood there in silence, listening as they slowly walked around the cabin. They stayed together, moving as a group. It didn't sound like they were spreading out or circling the place, at least not yet. Then they reached the front. I froze as I heard boots thud against the wooden porch, right outside the door. In that moment, I truly believed this was the end. I didn't dare look. What disturbed me the most was how quiet they were. No voices, no whispers, no coughing. Nothing but synchronized footsteps. They moved like they knew exactly what they were doing. What kind of group comes out into the middle of nowhere, in the dead of winter, and does something like this? I stood there, barely breathing, knowing they were just on the other side of the door, waiting. Minutes passed, then more. It felt like an eternity. Finally, after maybe 15 minutes, I decided I had to look. I slowly crept to the window and lifted the blind just a fraction, enough to peer through with one eye. The porch was empty. No one was there. They were gone. All of them. Without a single sound of them leaving. I didn't stop to pack. I grabbed only my car keys, ran out of the cabin, and jumped into my truck. I half expected them to be waiting somewhere along the narrow dirt road, blocking the only way out. But the drive back through the forest was empty. I didn't see a single person. To this day, I don't know what I experienced that night. A group of people stalking me in the woods, cutting off my power, surrounding my cabin, and then doing nothing. It doesn't make sense. What were they trying to do? I don't have any answers, and I haven't been back since. But I own that place. One day, I'll have to return. And honestly, I'm terrified of what I might find when I do.
Subscribe and I'll tell you another story the next time you're alone in the dark.